The decision of shadows. Mark Zuckerberg's million-dollar choice. The room was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that suffocates, that weighs on the skin like heavy fog. Mark sat alone, his posture rigid, eyes fixed on the faint blue glow of a laptop screen. Numbers danced across its charts, engagement graphs, timelines of growth and collapse. He barely noticed. Behind his eyes, the ghosts were louder than any metrics. The decision had already been made. The world had already changed. But in the shadows of his office, as the air conditioner hummed a steady, lifeless rhythm, Mark felt the truth. Every choice has a price. And this one, his, had carved deeper scars than any line of code ever could. It was not money he feared losing. He had more of it than he could ever spend. What haunted him was something more elusive. Trust, innocence, maybe even himself. He had given something away the night he chose power over principle. And now, years later, the echoes still followed him. The seed of doubt before the storm. There was the quiet ambition of a young man in a cramped dorm room at Harvard. Mark had always been different. Not just smart was common here. He was obsessive, detached. A boy who saw patterns in human behavior the way most people saw colors in a painting. He didn't talk much. He listened, analyzed, and coded. It started with an idea that was almost trivial. A way to connect students, to make the vastness of campus smaller, more intimate. Faces, names, networks. A simple directory. A toy, some called it. But Mark knew better. He had seen the hunger in people's eyes, their need to be seen, to belong. He was not building a toy. He was building a mirror, and people couldn't stop looking. By the time the Facebook spread beyond Harvard's walls, Mark was no longer just a student. He was something else, something larger, hungrier. Investors circled. Friends bickered. Lawsuits simmered. But at the core of it all was one unshakable fact. The world was changing, and he was at the center. Still, inside him, there was a whisper, a question. What happens when the mirror becomes too powerful? The moment of the choice, the true moment, came years later, hidden behind boardroom doors, shrouded in polite smiles and poisoned promises. The company was growing. Billions of users, billions of posts, a map of humanity drawn in data points and intimate confessions. But growth has a hunger of its own. It demands more. Always more. That's when the proposition landed on his desk. To open the gates. To allow advertisers, political campaigns, even governments, to not just use the platform, but weaponize it. The language was sanitized, dressed in corporate euphemisms. Targeted engagement, personalized reach, optimizing communication. But beneath the polished surface, Mark understood the truth. He was being asked to turn human connection into currency. His executives argued. Some warned of risks of manipulation, of harm. Others promised endless revenue, dominance that would stretch across decades. And in the middle sat Mark, silent, weighing. He knew what it meant. This wasn't about one quarter's profit. It was about power, raw, unfiltered power. With one decision, Facebook would stop being a network. It would become an empire. And he said yes. A quiet yes. A calculated yes. A yes that no one outside the room would hear, but everyone on Earth would one day feel. The results were immediate. Money flooded in, faster than anyone could count. Ads became omniscient, bending desires like puppeteers pulling invisible strings. Politicians leaned in, their campaigns engineered with surgical precision. Brands soared, movements rose, nations shifted. On the outside, it was a victory. Facebook was no longer just a company. It was infrastructure, woven into the fabric of life itself. The boy who once coded in his dorm room now shaped the behavior of billions. Mark told himself it was progress. He told himself he was building a tool, a platform, a neutral stage where humanity could play out its drama. But deep down, he knew the truth. Neutrality was a myth. By giving people what they craved, he had opened a door that could never be closed. And behind that door, monsters had begun to crawl out. The cracks in the mirror at first, the fractures were small. A scandal here, a leak there. Users complaining about privacy, journalists uncovering manipulation, governments asking uncomfortable questions. Then came the storm, the headlines, the hearings, the revelation that data was not just being harvested, it was being sold, weaponized, turned into bullets of persuasion aimed at the hearts of voters. Mark sat in front of Congress, his face carefully blank, his answers rehearsed to the edge of meaninglessness. Cameras flashed, senators barked. The world watched as the man who connected humanity became the symbol of its betrayal. But the truth was darker still. It wasn't just about politics. It wasn't just about ads. It was about something far more intimate, the human soul. People no longer spoke to each other. They spoke to algorithms. Outrage spread faster than kindness. Lies traveled further than truth. And somewhere, at the core of it, sat the decision Mark had once made in that boardroom. The ghosts of choice alone in his office. Years later, Mark still heard them. The laughter of investors celebrating profits that tasted like blood. The applause of audiences praising innovation, while society fractured beneath it. The silence of friendships lost, of trust broken, of a world reshaped by something it never truly understood. Mark had built an empire. But what is an empire if its foundation is rot? He scrolled through endless notifications, updates, crises demanding his attention. But his mind wandered back to that single word. That yes, that quiet, careful yes. He wondered, if he had said no, would the world be different? Would he? But it was too late. Choices are not undone. They echo, they haunt, they define. Reflection in the glass. Sometimes, late at night, he would look into the dark screen of his phone, his own reflection staring back. He saw not the billionaire, not the CEO, but the boy in the dorm room, the boy who just wanted to connect people. And he almost pitied him, because that boy never understood the cost. The cost was not money. It was not lawsuits, or bad headlines, or government hearings. The cost was deeper, invisible, a fracture in the human spirit that could not be repaired. Mark had wanted to connect the world, and he had. But connection, when twisted, becomes chains. And now billions were bound by them. The silence in his office deepened. The hum of the air conditioner pressed against him. He closed his eyes. For a moment, he almost wished he could go back before the yes, before the empire, before the ghosts. But time only moves forward. And the weight of choice never leaves. Mark opened his eyes, the screen before him glowing with another crisis, another storm, another reminder. He exhaled, steady but hollow. The decision had been his. The consequences belonged to everyone. The storm outside the company walls did not end. It grew. Every scandal cracked another piece of the mirror he had built. Each revelation about stolen data, manipulated elections, or hate speech spreading like wildfire left him exposed, stripped of the careful armor of genius. The world saw not a visionary, but a puppeteer, and yet the empire held. The fortress of isolation Mark learned quickly that wealth builds walls. Not just physical walls, though those too grew taller and stronger around his estate. The real walls were invisible, woven from silence and fear. No one told him the whole truth anymore. Executives softened reports, publicists spun disasters, lawyers rewrote reality in sterile, lifeless words. He was surrounded, yet utterly alone. At night, in the vast emptiness of his mansion, he would wander the hallways and feel the silence press against him. His family slept. The world outside seethed, and he walked alone, haunted by the feeling that every step echoed in a corridor built from lies. There were mirrors everywhere, sleek modern panels reflecting his face. But he no longer trusted them. He no longer trusted himself. At price of growth, the platform had become a beast. Every engineer, every algorithm tweak, every decision was made in service of one metric: growth. More users, more engagement, more time on screen. Growth was the god, and Mark its high priest. But gods are never satisfied. He had seen the reports, how outrage was stickier than calm, how lies were more profitable than truth. And yet, each time he faced the decision, he chose the same path. More. Always more. Because to stop growing was to admit weakness, to admit that the empire had limits. And Mark had built his identity on the illusion of limitlessness. But inside, a sickness festered, the quiet knowledge that he was feeding something monstrous. The world turns, it was not just governments anymore. It was people, ordinary people. They began to protest, to question, to delete their accounts. The movement spread like cracks in glass, small at first, then undeniable. And yet billions stayed, addicted, dependent, trapped. Mark realized then that he had not just built a product, he had built a cage. A cage people locked themselves into, whispering about escape, but never leaving. That was the victory. And the curse. Because what kind of man finds his legacy in chains? Shadows in the Senate. The hearings returned. This time, the questions were sharper, the tone colder. Lawmakers no longer looked at him as a wunderkind, but as a man responsible for chaos he could not control. He adjusted his tie. He rehearsed his lines. He gave the same answers, polished into lifeless shapes. We are working on it. We are improving. We are listening. But behind his calm exterior, Mark felt the weight. He knew these hearings weren't about laws. They were about something deeper, accountability. And accountability was the one thing he could not escape. Every time a senator spoke of manipulation, every time a journalist asked about hate speech, every time a whistleblower leaked another truth, Mark felt the echo of that yes, that one quiet yes. The cold victory, and yet the company survived. Profits soared, stock climbed, investors cheered. To the market, none of the scandals mattered. To the shareholders, ethics were noise. Mark became richer. His influence spread further. Virtual reality, artificial intelligence, entire digital worlds were built beneath his name. He had more control than any emperor in history could have dreamed. But control is not peace, and wealth is not rest. He lay awake at night, staring at ceilings in mansions he barely remembered buying, wondering how it was possible to have everything and feel nothing. The quiet regret in the rare moments of honesty, Mark admitted it to himself. The regret was not about the scandals, the hearings, or even the broken trust of billions. The regret was simpler. It was about the boy in the dorm room. That boy had not wanted power. That boy had not wanted empires. He had wanted connection, a way to feel less alone. And somewhere along the way, Mark had betrayed him. He saw that boy and his own children, their faces lit by the glow of screens, their laughter tinged with the same hunger he had once tried to soothe. And he wondered, what kind of inheritance had he given them? Not land, not legacy, but a labyrinth. A digital prison with his fingerprints on every wall. The lesson of silence years later, when the storms calmed, when the headlines moved on to fresher scandals and newer villains, Mark remained. Older now. His face lined, his eyes darker. Still rich, still powerful, but quieter. The world had adapted to his empire, as people always do. Outrage turned to resignation. Dependence grew deeper. Life went on. But the silence never left him. The silence of that boardroom when he first said yes. The silence of empty hallways echoing in his estate. The silence of a man who had won everything and lost something unnamed, something irreplaceable. The final reflection one evening, long after the world had stopped watching, Mark sat in front of a mirror. Just a mirror. No screens, no data, no glowing numbers. Only his own reflection staring back. He saw the boy again. The boy with wide eyes and restless hands, dreaming of connection. He almost smiled. But the smile faded, because the boy in the mirror was not him anymore. The boy was gone. And in his place sat the man who had chosen empire over innocence. The man who had traded trust for growth. The man who had said yes when the world needed him to say no. Mark leaned closer, his breath fogging the glass, and he whispered not to the world, not to investors, not to senators, but to himself. Every decision has a price, and some prices are paid forever. The mirror stared back, silent. The house around him was silent. The empire he had built roared on outside, but inside there was only silence. And silence, Mark knew, was the truest reflection of all.